Good evening. My name is Father John Markey, and I'm the director of the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Spirituality here at Oblate School of Theology. And on behalf of the Institute and the Oblate School, I'd like to welcome all of you here this evening for this lecture given by one of our visiting scholars who we're very proud to be able to have with us and happy to have with us this semester. And also personally for me as a Dominican priest and Dominican friar to have a fellow Dominican with us. So we'll get started here in just a moment, but we want to welcome you all and let you know again that there will be questions and answers, opportunity for that at the after the lecture. And there's a question and answer feature there on your at the bottom of your screen that you can write questions in either as we go or at the end. And we'll be asking Father Louis those at the end, or you can use the chat feature. So again, I'm very grateful to have all of you with us, and of course, grateful to have our presenter. And I'd like to introduce Father Wayne Cavalier. He's the head of the Congar Institute for Lay Faith Formation, and he's also the director of the Doctorate of Ministry program here at Oblate School of Theology to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this OST continuing education event. I'm very pleased, along with the other Dominican friars here in San Antonio, to welcome Father Louis Wa to Oblate School of Theology. We're very pleased to have him with us. We're honored that you've taken the time to come and be with us at Oblate School of Theology, and especially this evening for your willingness to share with us this presentation. A few words about Father Louis. Louis Wa is a Dominican friar who received his doctorate from the University of Cambridge, after which he taught at Boston College for 21 years and is now Professor of Theology at the Dominican University College in Ottawa, Canada. Father Louis held the Lonergan Chair at Seton Hall University in the spring of 2019, and he was a Lonergan Fellow at Boston College in the spring of 2020. He is interested in intellectual, affective, and mystical approaches to God, in faith and revelation, in interreligious dialogue, and in the relations between Christianity and cultures. His most recent books are Coherent Christianity Toward an Articulate Faith, Embracing Desire, and The Feeling of Transcendence, an Experience of God, all published by Wittenstock in Oregon. And we're very pleased to announce that in June, Father Louis will continue here at OST offering a course based on, in part, on his book, Embracing Desire. Tonight's presentation is entitled Various Understandings of Religious Experience in Christian History, and I'm very pleased to welcome Father Louis.
Good evening. I hope you hear me. Tonight, so first I would like to thank Wayne Cavalier for his presentation, and also Father John Markey for having organized this lecture. The title is Various Understanding of Religious Experience in Christian History. I just get a message that the sound is good. I hope it's good for all of us. Next slide, please. So this is the outline of the lecture. You see, it goes according to chronological order the theme of religious experience, A, in the Bible and the patristic period, the Middle Ages, Protestants in modern times, Catholics in modern times, religious experience according to Bernard Lonergan. And next slide, please. And a subjectivity open to objectivity. And finally, the heart and the mind. Next slide, please. So in the Bible, it's very interesting to notice that in prophet Ezekiel, in chapter 16, he emphasizes the individual conscience, the conscience of the individual person. And that it's a progress that in advance, a progress in the biblical revelation, in the sense that prior to Ezekiel, the emphasis was on collective guilt, the guilt of a community or people. See, so for Ezekiel, he begins to emphasize the individual conscience, and that's a very interesting thing. This is going to continue with different thinkers. After Ezekiel, you have in the Middle Ages, Peter Abelard, who emphasizes also conscience. It's another progression. After Peter Abelard, you have in the Renaissance, in the 16th century, a strong emphasis also on conscience, especially, for instance, St. Thomas More, who took his time before finally rejecting Henry VIII's view of himself as a chancellor, and finally was put to death. And then Luther also emphasized enormously the individual. His own experience of conversion shapes his whole theology. Next to that, you have Newman, Saint John Henry Newman. And John Henry Newman also emphasizes conscience. And I forgot to put on a slide his what he said about conscience, but I'm going to read it for you. It's not too long. It's in a letter addressed to the Duke of Norfolk. The Duke of Norfolk was a long-standing Catholic family in England. And he said this, and let me just give you the taste of English, or British if you want, English in the 19th century. So I'm going to try to imitate him. Certainly, if I am obliged to bring religion into after-dinner toasts, which indeed does not seem quite the thing, I shall drink to the Pope, if you please, still to conscience first, and to the Pope afterwards. Isn't that something interesting on his part? So let's go back to the Bible. And next slide, we'll have something from Ezekiel. Okay, so you have that. The quotations are in blue, as you realize. So I don't know whether Wayne could or John could read the text, beginning with a new heart.
A new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh.
Thank you. So you see the personal experience or religious experience that is evoked here. God says to his people and to all the individuals, I will remove from your body the heart of stone, and give you a heart of flesh. Lonergan, Bernard Lonergan, I will explain who he is later in this lecture. Bernard Lonergan, a Canadian Jesuit, has British humor from time to time. And so he said that the problem is that the heart of stone doesn't want to be removed and replaced by the heart of flesh, evoking how conversion is not easy because there is a part of ourselves which says, no, I don't want to change. I don't want to be removed and put aside. In the New Testament, the first letter of John is also significant. So we will hear a reader, please.
What we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life.
So you see that it's very experiential. We heard the good news. Back to the previous slide. We heard the good news, and we have seen with our eyes, of course, Christ, both before Easter and after Easter in the apparitions. We have looked at him and touch with our hands, so to speak. So you have that is, of course, the beginning of the famous doctrine by Origen of Alexandria of the five senses, five spiritual senses, but they're also physical. So next, please. So now we move toward an exception among the church fathers. It is the Gregory of Nyssa, who said,
the experience of those who have been judged worthy of enjoying what is beyond conception.
Okay, so you have typical Gregory here, one of the great Cappadocians, father of the 4th century. So peira is the Greek word for experience. But the other church fathers, and even himself, don't use the word experience. And I'm going to explain to you why in a few seconds. Okay, and then also typical also of the church fathers, judge worthy of enjoying what is beyond conception. He means by conception, the concepts, the ideas. He means the thinking. So the reality of the Christian experience for the church fathers and for Gregory of Nyssa is beyond what can be said. It's called negative theology, in the sense that you go beyond what you have learned, and then in a kind of experience that is knowing, but no longer knowledge, in the sense that an assembling of concepts, or if you will, of ideas. So we go beyond the ideas. So let's go backward for the slides. Backward again. Okay, so you see the Bible and the patristic period. So, backward again. Okay, so in the patristic period, 1st to 9th century, patristic mean, of course, of the church fathers. The emphasis is placed on the reformulation of the Christian message in Greek categories. Well, in the West, it's going to be still Greek categories, even though they wrote in Latin, but it's still very Greek as a kind of thinking. Augustine, and before Augustine, Ambrose of Milan, typically Greek, and more precisely, Neoplatonism, the Neoplatonism of Plotinus, a great Greek philosopher. So experience is there in those reformulations of the Christian message, but it is a secondary theme. Why? Because the church fathers' intention was to make the good news understood. Make people understand the good news. So it is charismatic, as we say. The charisma in Greek means a message. And it's dogmatic in the good sense of the word dogmatic. There is also a pejorative sense that prevails, unfortunately, at the moment in our Western culture. But nevertheless, you can use the word dogmatic in a good sense. We could say doctrinal. There are doctrines about Christ, about our salvation, about the incarnation. And those doctrines gave rise to creeds. And today at the Mass, we had the creed because it was a solemnity on the Feast of the Annunciation. So experience is there. And if you see that it's kind of holistic. It's not yet differentiated. So they are not concerned with communicating the experience, but they are concerned to make the dogmatic and also moral, the moral implications of faith in Jesus understood. So that is why the word experience is very rare. We saw it in only once in Gregory of Nyssa. Then you have the Desert Fathers and Gregory. The Desert Fathers are an exception in the patristic age. They are people who left the cities where they thought that Christian life was decadent because the empire with Constantine, Emperor Constantine, had become very favorable to Christianity. And so they went outside and they recreated what they thought was the fervor of the origins at the time of the persecution. So they don't communicate any theology or any dogmatic things, but they communicate in aphorisms or maxims, if you want, a wisdom which is a bit cryptic and make people think, but it's kind of very concise. The wisdoms or the sayings of the Desert Fathers. You have that also, mind you, in Buddhism in Japan, the famous koans. A koan was a riddle, and then make people with the intention of making people think and then have an enlightenment. The same kind of approach of pedagogy as you have in the Desert Fathers. So let's move on. Next slide, please. Okay, so to this day, that's important for ecumenical reasons. The Eastern Orthodox churches have continued the Greek patristic orientation, notably by not dissociating religious experience from doctrine. So they to this day, the Orthodox have complained and have reproached us Westerners for having been too dogmatic. The catechisms and all that, and neglecting the religious experience. So let's move on. Another slide. Okay, another slide. Another one. Okay, so now we go to the Latin Middle Ages, the Middle Ages in the West, which began with a time of Charlemagne, the emperor, 800. He was crowned emperor in 800. And there were several renewals in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were absolutely not dark ages, except perhaps a certain period after Charlemagne, when the empire was divided, and then they went back to something rather dark. But there was, of course, the Renaissance of the 12th century, about which I'll say a word shortly. So in the 12th century, there is a widespread vocabulary of experientia in Latin in that century. It's reported, and there's been books written on that. It's very, very striking. It's all over the place. Experientia. So that's the wonderful Renaissance of the 12th century. And it continues in the 13th century with the Albert the Great, a Dominican, who taught Thomas Aquinas, his best disciple, and also the Franciscan Bonaventure, all saints and all doctors of the church. So, but they are still very close to the 12th century, and in fact, they could not have the systematic theology of these thinkers without the 12th century. The 12th century was the kind of renewal, spiritual renewal, and then you have the flowering of that in terms of systematic theology. So we have, for instance, an example of that in the Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas, the first section of the second part, question 112, article 5. So let's move to another slide, and you'll have the text. Okay, so Wayne, could you continue being our good reader?
Things are known conjecturally by signs, and thus anyone may know he has grace when he perceives that he delights in God and that he despises worldly things, and inasmuch as he is not conscious of any mortal sin. And thus it is written, to him that overcomes, I will give the hidden manna, which no one knows but he who receives it. Because whoever receives it knows by experiencing a certain sweetness, which he who does not receive it does not experience.
You see the place of experience in that kind of thinking, huh? Because his position was that we cannot go and demonstrate that we are in a state of grace. That's beyond, because we need divine view of the theological virtues of faith, hope, charity. So we don't know for sure, but we can conjecture. Things are known, or realities would be a better translation. Realities of faith are known conjecturally by signs. And signs, of course, it is really the kind of discernment that you find in St. Paul, the signs. And also after that, you have that in Ignatius of Loyola, after Thomas Aquinas, and of course in John of the Cross, signs. So then we can conjecture that we are in a state of grace because we delight in God. See how Christian life also is a matter of enjoyment for those who are virtuous, not conscious of any mortal sin. And then, of course, he quotes the book of Revelation. And then after that, you have the vocabulary is so striking. By experiencing a certain sweetness, experienciam, experiencing, and then dulce dinis, dulce do, in Latin is the key word for enjoyment in the spiritual life. Later, in Ignatius of Loyola, he has another name, which is no longer medieval, which is consolation, consolation, you see, but it's the same. But in the Middle Ages, everybody spoke of sweetness, dulcedo. And of course, being a disciple of Thomas Aquinas, I rejoice about that. I think that's wonderful. So you can expect to have those moments of sweetness if you are really doing your best, not being perfect, but doing your best to be faithful to God. So let's move on. Okay, so now Protestants in modern times. I mentioned Martin Luther before, and the importance of his personal experience of conversion and faith. So he really discovered great insight that he had, namely that he was justified by God and through faith. So to grace and faith. So you have sola fide, sola gratia, and there's a third one which I'm forgetting at the moment. So it's very interesting because, of course, as I said, his theology was really very experiential. You feel the man there, you feel the believer, you feel also the sinner, because for him, that's a bad theology, but it's linked with his experience. We are not transformed by grace. We remain sinner. Simul justus et peccator. At the same time, a just person in the eyes of God and a sinner in reality. Interestingly, Calvin corrected that. He said, there is room for sanctification in Christian life, but not for Luther. Luther is extremely, he's less hopeful than Calvin in a way. But on other matters like double predestination, Calvin is very dark. Okay, so then you have the radical Protestants. Who are they? They are the disciple of Zwingli. Zwingli was a contemporary of Martin Luther, and he began the reform before Calvin in the same country. So Zwingli was a German-speaking pastor, priest who left the Catholic Church and launched what has been called later radical Protestantism, in contrast to Lutheran and Calvinistic or Reformed Protestantism. So they were less interested in dogma than the Lutherans and the Calvinists. And they emphasize also more freedom in liturgy. They have been very creative liturgy, and also a liturgy that was expressive of personal experience. So they are important. And they are, of course, the ancestors of the Mennonites, the Baptists. The Baptists are important, as you know, especially in this country, and other groups of Protestants. Then you have also the Pietists in the 17th century in Germany, and they were emphasizing personal piety. And piety is not the same thing as having devotions, which is more modern 19th century understanding of the word piety. No, it's really religiousness, faith in a way, lived, let's say lived faith, you see? So they are important, the German Pietists. When I was a young student of church history, I loved the Pietists because really you feel that they are really living something intense. The intensity of the Pietists struck me. Later, I discovered the pastor, Jonathan Edwards. Of course, you heard of him because he was an American. And he has a fine theology which incorporates experience. Jonathan Edwards. In England, of course, the Methodists with John Wesley and his brother, who was the composer of hymns, the Methodists, and they moved to the US and they made a lot of conversions in the United States and Canada. The Quakers are about the same, maybe a bit better, before the Methodists. I should change a little bit my order here. The Quakers began, of course, in England, and they have almost no liturgy. I attended in England a couple of times a Quaker Sunday service, and there is no liturgy in contrast to all the other Protestants who have the liturgy. Well, some of the Protestants are like the Baptists. They don't have a real liturgy except a few times a year. The same for the Calvinists. The holy meal of the Lord, that's really very, very important for them, and it's rare. In contrast to the Lutherans and the Catholics, who have kept the tradition of having a real Eucharist every Sunday. So the Quakers and the Shakers branch following the Quakers. And Lonergan also, I praised his humor a few minutes ago. He said, when the Quakers stopped quaking, the Shakers began shaking. So now we continue with the following. In the following century, you have Schleiermacher. I wrote many things on Schleiermacher because I found is very, very important. He is the father of what has been called after him liberal Protestantism. And liberalism means liberty, liberal, liberty, it's not political. It is liberty in Christian thinking. So you have this emphasized among the liberal Protestant churches even today, the mainline churches, the Presbyterian, Episcopal, and others. So Schleiermacher distinguished outward religion, which is the field of personal experience, and inward religion. Inward religion, of course, is the field of personal experience. Or, if you will, the inward religion, he has synonyms, self-consciousness, which is the same as God consciousness in us, or inward experience. So the word experience is there, but it's a whole theology also of experience, of religious experience. And I'll show you later the advantages and the drawbacks of this kind of thinking. So let's move to the next slide. Okay. So in Schleiermacher, there is the absence of the medieval understanding of the supernatural. He uses the word, but it means religious. And it's very, it's not really grace. The supernatural in Thomas Aquinas' understanding is grace. And it's contrast to the natural. So, for instance, all what has been involved in the efforts to set up this lecture with wonderful Victoria, who he organized all this, and we had back and forth interactions in the last 2 weeks. All this is natural, but prayer would be supernatural. But also, you can supernaturalize the natural. So all these efforts, if you are a believer, are really in the broader context of a supernatural relationship with God. Okay, so all this has been abolished in modern times by the Jewish philosopher Spinoza in the, he was Dutch, in the 17th century. He really make a case against the notion of supernatural. We don't want that, we don't need that. But what he rejected was, in my opinion, a caricature of Thomas Aquinas' understanding of the supernatural. But the caricature began in Catholic minds towards at the end of the Middle Ages. So he was really rejecting something real. And you have also this opposition between supernatural and natural in Martin Luther. He was not interested in politics. He got involved, and he said to the nobles of Germany, crush those people who have want to live freedom in their social life and political life. Crush them. That's terrible. Calvin corrected that. Calvin said, you can be sanctified in the family, etc., and you have, if you are a just person. Okay, so theology also, that's another weakness of Schleiermacher, is only the provisional consensus of the German Protestant Church. And you know, he was the great influence on the union in Germany between the Lutherans and the Calvinists. Lutherans were the majority, but there were a strong minority of Calvinists in the. So that's about around 1840. There was a reunion, and then that hence the name at the moment in Germany. It is the Evangelical Church of Germany. Evangelical, meaning not meaning the evangelicals in another sense, but meaning inspired by the gospel. Evangelical Church of Germany. So, but you see, it's provisional. It's a consensus, and it's he said explicitly, it can be. You can have another understanding of Christianity later, after me, or after the present time. So it's relative to the epoch. It's a kind of relativism. It's moderate relativism. There are worse cases of relativism, but it's nevertheless, it's a relativism in my opinion. Okay, so what happened with the other 19th century liberal Protestants? Well, of course, there was a succession of interesting thinkers after Schleiermacher, and one of the best, and my favorite one is Hermann. Hermann is extremely. You have the German piety at its best. It's absolutely wonderful, but like others, Hermann was a relativist. It is one way of being a Christian, and you don't have a universal way. You cannot have that. They did not believe in that. And the last great thinkers in that line of liberal Protestants was Ernst Troeltsch. Troeltsch was extremely honest, and he realized that liberal Protestantism had big problems, intellectual problems, and he tried to solve them, and he was unsuccessful. But I admire so much his honesty. Ernst Troeltsch. He was important also in the German Weimar Republic after the First World War. I think he was minister of culture or of education, things like that. So what else do you have in the Protestant world? You have the great revivals of the evangelicals in the 19th and 20th century. In England and in the United States, big assemblies and big crowds, etc. And you commit your life to Christ and you receive Christ in faith, and then you are saved. You're going to go to paradise. But the sanctification is not very much emphasized in that kind of faith. It's Lutheran faith. Okay, and then after that, at the beginning of the 20th century, Pentecostalism. And you know that the Pentecostals in the last 25 years have grown much more than the other Protestants. And there are also Pentecostals, as you know, in the Catholic Church, the charismatic or Pentecostal, because all this is based on Pentecost. The Holy Spirit, almost falling onto the heads of the believers and then make them great witnesses to Christ. So there's something admirable in Pentecostalism, and there is maybe the future. According to a Pentecostal theologian with whom I had a few conversations a couple of years ago at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, it is the future. It might be the future of ecumenism, in the sense that the Catholic Church would become more Pentecostal. And after all, it's based on Pentecost, so it's not really wishful thinking. And the Protestant Pentecostals would learn from the tradition of the Catholic Church. And he's one of those. And he teaches in a seminary, a Pentecostal seminary in California, and he deplores the ignorance of most of the pastors in that church. So they are not guilty, but it's kind of their tradition doesn't have much. In fact, I came across an article a few years ago, and I was also in admiration by a non-denominational Protestant, and of course the Pentecostals are non-denominational, arguing that the non-denominational Protestant should read the text of the social doctrine of the church. Isn't that something? He was aware, this author, I don't remember his name, is aware, it's an article that he wrote, he's aware that they can learn from the Catholic Church and vice versa. So next slide, please. Okay, in modern times, the Catholics. So neo-scholastic theology, beginning in the 17th century and flourishing. It's kind of a false flourishing because I don't believe it was really very Thomist and very faithful to the mind of the Middle Ages. Anyway, so it's modern scholastic theology, neo-scholastic, a new scholasticism. For them, there is no such a thing as religious experience because of the separation between nature and grace. They don't talk about the natural. They talk about nature. And nature was really something that there was a place of ordinary experience. But there is it was for them impossible to experience grace. So I cannot explain that much more. But the Jesuit Henri de Lubac, a French Jesuit, whose views were really rejected by the church in around 1950, argued that no, there is really a link, and the link is, in my own words, making the natural supernatural, as I explained before today. Okay, so that was really a very dangerous idea, that this separation. So Ignatius of Loyola has an emphasis on the individual person's spiritual moral progression in his spiritual exercises. So exercise means, it's a metaphor. As you exercise physically, you can exercise morally and spiritually, and then you have an experience of moving forward, of growth in faith and love. So I would just like to quote the phrase by a Jesuit, Jean Groux, a French Jesuit in the second half of the 18th century, who lived in England during the French Revolution, which was very, very anti-clerical, and also with the guillotine, etc. So he moved to England, crossed the Channel, and he wrote, "The great master of the interior life is experience." Next slide, please. Okay, so now continuing the Catholics in modern time, well, you have also a lot of experience in the Carmelites. Teresa of Avila, 16th century, John of the Cross, and then later, at the end of the 19th century, Thérèse of Lisieux and Elizabeth of the Trinity. So we'll just say a word about Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila spoke a lot about experiencia. That's the Spanish word for experience. And she wrote a lot about her own experience. Why? It's not that she wanted to, she lacked humility, she would have been self-centered. No. It's because the Spanish Inquisition was very frightened by any new idea, and the reforms were not very popular for the inquisitors. Her spiritual director, I think he was a Jesuit, said to her, "You must write about your experiences to show that they come from God and not from two other possible sources." One of the sources was personal fancies, imaginations. That was negative. So if the inquisitor could show it's not really orthodox because it's personal, they would condemn someone. And the other possibility was it could come from the devil. So of course, that's also very bad. So she had to show and demonstrate that her visions and insights, she called them visions, but they are in fact insights, especially into the Trinity, the highest insights she has, and she says that several times in her works, were about the Trinity. And it was extremely joyful, extremely the rewards of religious insight that was so profound. So she was never arrested and put in jail. Mind you, a few decades before her, Ignatius of Loyola was also questioned by the inquisitors, bad Dominicans of that age. Okay, so you have Teresa of Avila. So she wanted to show that her what she had received was really coming from God. But she emphasized the personal experiences in especially her life, the life that she wrote, and also the story of the foundations, 2 different books, 2 different works, the foundations of the Reformed Carmelite nuns. Okay, so then also in the Catholicism, you had the phenomenon of what was called modernism around 1900 in France, and that was condemned by Pope Pius X. And he puts together a lot of different thinkers, and he really created a kind of entity that never existed. And it was very bad, and of course some left the church because of that, and it was really a big crisis. And it was, but their questions were good, but their answers to their questions were very deficient. Hence the condemnation in an encyclical. But the problem is that the Catholic Church lost many decades because of her anti-modernism. And in fact, they call that modernism. It was a wholesale condemnation after Pius IX, who has also in his syllabus of errors condemned all the modern values: democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It was all rejected. I was appalled when I downloaded that and read that about 5 years ago. I had heard of it, but I had never seen the text. So you see, with Pius IX and with Pius X, you had that kind of hardening of church doctrine and unwillingness to listen to relevant questions. And in a word, what were the main question of the modernists? It was really how to reconcile dogma, understood in a rigid sense, and scripture. Loisy was a good scriptural scholar. He was the main thinker among the modernists, and he realized that. But their answer was, we prefer the symbolic world of scripture, and we throw out of the window the dogmas. So it was a kind of anti-dogmatism or relativism, because then it becomes the symbolic world in which you can never show that that Christian revelation was objective. I'll return to this problem in a few minutes. So Karl Rahner also has much room for a Jesuit. Of course, you know, he was a German Jesuit, for the personal experience, what he calls the transcendental. And Bernard Lonergan, another Jesuit, Canadian, whom I knew personally, who also puts the very words are religious experience, and it's at the center of his theology in his wonderful book, Method in Theology. Next slide. Okay, so let's say a word about Bernard Lonergan, because I think he has a solution to the problem of objectivity. And of course, it begins with why is religious experience central in theology? It became central with Schleiermacher in the Protestant world, at least for the liberal Protestants. And it became central in theology. It's not only in spirituality, but in systematic theology with Lonergan. He was inspired by the famous jewel, the cloud of unknowing. And he discovered it thanks to another Jesuit whom I met in Tokyo 3 times. I'm very proud of the Jesuit influence upon me, a Dominican. I learned so much from them. And for 21 years at Boston College, a Jesuit university. William Johnston. And William Johnston, he discovered the centrality of religious experience in the cloud of unknowing. And after that, Johnson heard that Lonergan has praised his views because Johnson wrote a book on the cloud of unknowing, and before writing a book, he also translated into modern English the 15th century work in Middle English, as we call it, the English of Middle Ages. So for Lonergan, religious experience is the transcendent component of the 4th level of human intentionality. I don't have the time to develop, but human intentionality means the openness of the human person to reality. So we intend reality. We want to know reality, and the basic dynamism is asking questions. So you have intentionality in science, you have intentionality in common sense or daily life. You have intentionality also in religion and also in systematic theology. What is it? It is a non-thematic. That's the jargon of rather non-thematic, or if you wish, non-systematic presence of true unrestricted love, which is not the result of reasoning, but what gives rise to faith and which comes before the acceptance of belief. So you have an experience of being unrestrictedly in love, which gives rise to faith as a knowing, not yet a knowledge. And then the faith expresses itself in beliefs. And then you have dogmas. You have a kind of natural progression if in a healthy Christian mind and heart. So let's move to the other text, the other slide. Okay, so could you read this again, Wayne?
Objectivity is simply the consequence of authentic subjectivity, of genuine attention, genuine intelligence, genuine reasonableness, genuine responsibility.
Thank you. So my comment is that there is what Lonergan calls the outer word, as confirming and helping the believers deepen the inner word that has been experienced inside their heart. So the unrestricted love that you feel at times is like an inner word that you hear, but it's not really hearing, that is more like feeling. You have the feeling of being in love, or you have the desire to love unrestrictively. Of course, in the concrete life, it's never being, except for Jesus and Mary, it was never lived perfectly. But the desire, the fundamental desire is there, is established. And then it gives rise to a knowing. And knowing is really the inner word. Let's move to the other slide. Okay, so now the heart and the mind. Well, affectivity and intellectuality are two interrelated dynamism. You see that in Lonergan's interpretation of the basic religious experience. It's a matter of love, but it's also immediately, it's conscious. And being conscious, you have what he calls faith. And I prefer to call that a knowing than a knowledge. And the knowledge comes after that in the outer words. So the dogmatic side of Christianity can be construed as an answer to the intellectual quest of humanity, provided the affective yearning stimulates the intellectual quest. So sometimes for some people, it's more the questions about the meaning of their life that gives rise to a religious interest. But for others, it's more like the heart that propels the mind. But there is a wonderful interaction among them. you should never choose the heart against the mind or the mind against the heart. In the among the Orthodox mystics in the East, they say, let your mind moves down into your heart. It's absolutely it. Absolutely fantastic. It's rather modern, this idea. Let the mind descend, goes down into your heart. So then you have a unity of heart and mind. Next slide. Okay. Before that, I was interested in saying a word. Let's move back. Let's move back. Okay. The subjectivity open to objectivity. So what I forgot to underline is that the objectivity is the consequence of authentic subjectivity. So the human person can be called a subject. That's philosophical, modern philosophy. I am a subject because whereas dogs are not subject in a way. Okay. So, but we have to become authentic. That's also a word you have in Heidegger in existentialism. Authenticity, personal authenticity. So the subjectivity must be authentic. And when it is authentic, then it becomes objective. It sounds like a trick, but it's not a trick. So a good historian, we say doesn't have a propensity to denigrate something. For instance, Gibson, the British the historian of the 18th century, he was really he wrote a book about the Roman Empire, but he really reduces Christian faith to something that he wants to get rid of. And Newman has an extraordinary response to Gibson in, where is that? It is in The Grammar of Assent. Very interesting. So I don't have to I cannot develop that. So let's move to the conclusion. Okay, so with Lonergan, it's very interesting to have a kind of theology more than Rahner, because Lonergan was really very good in mathematics and in understanding of physics, and also history later in his life. So with him, we have the idea that religious experience can be located within the overall dynamism of human intentionality. And that means integrating faith and reason. There has a wonderful encyclical, my favorite encyclical by Pope John Paul II, Faith and Reason, Fides et Ratio, which comes to the same conclusions, but it's another approach that by John Paul, which I appreciate, but I prefer Lonergan's approach. You see, because then I remember one of my undergraduate students at Boston College, when I found that idea that the human mind functions in the same way, but of course it's analogical, but it's the same way basically as in religion. And that's also in Aquinas in his second question in the Summa Theology. This idea of beginning with does God exist according to Aristotle. And so Aristotle was the science of the day for Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so you have also an integration there of faith and reason at the beginning of the Summa Theology. The same thing for Lonergan. But Lonergan talks about human intentionality. You desire to know the real as it is. The best place to experience that is in marriage. I was never married. I don't plan to get married, but nevertheless, I have good friends who are married. And I know from them that to know the other as she is, as he is the most important thing in marriage, because love cannot survive for a long time if there is misunderstanding. And if the other also changes, which is normal in a healthy life, well, you have to adjust and you have to dialogue. And I remember Sebastian Moore, a friend of mine at Boston College, would say, it's hard work. It's hard work. It's really, you have to be tenacious. Okay, so you see that we need that enormously in our world that is influenced by the modern understanding of science, of the sciences, if you want to, because history is also maybe not a science, but surely a world of scholarship. And then religious experience is at the very center of theology, as in Schleiermacher, the two great instances. Maybe the third one would be Rahner. And then next slide. Religious experience is not the sole basis of the theological enterprise. That would be also a misunderstanding of what Lonergan was up to. Several other factors being present, such as personal and communitarian quest for meaning. So you have that also, that are factors that are very helpful. If you have friends or you have mentors, in college or elsewhere, and before college, in high school, if you have mentors that stimulate your quest for meaning, and you have a group of friends. That was my experience when I was a teenager. We have a group of artists and philosophers, and we discuss all the times. So we're a communal quest for meaning. The religious traditions can inspire us also. You can read about Buddhism, you can read about Hinduism, you can read about Islam, the African religions, and all these wonderful. So they have each of those religions has really wisdom, capacity to trust the word of God. That's also something that you can communicate. So finally, the ecumenical character of Lonergan's theology, he says humbly and realistically, it's up to the other denominations who are not Catholic to decide to what extent they want to use my method. Very good. Huh? And there would be, of course, he was aware there would be many rephrasings of that method. So I think I have said what I wanted to say, and we'll, without further ado, move towards the question and answer period.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Louis. That was remarkable. And anyone who'd like to ask questions, know that there's a question answer tab below the screen there on your Zoom screen. Feel free to write a question. I'll be conveying the questions to Father Louis. We have some already, so I'll start. First of all, from Kevin, we have a question. Father Ra, can you address the fact that there is a great hunger for experience rather than dogmas and creeds among people of goodwill today, both inside and outside the church, and perhaps tie this to Rahner's famous observation that the Christian of the future will be a mystic or not at all?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course.
But why don't we start with that and then have you respond?
Yeah. You see, you have two definitions of mysticism in Bernard McGinn's famous writings. The great historian of Christian mysticism, from the Bible to the late 18th century. Unfortunately, he's not been able to complete the whole series. But anyway, it's a great history work. And so he has a broad definition and a strict definition. The broad definition is what Rahner also meant, in my opinion. He didn't mean that everybody would be mystics in the strict sense, because in the strict sense, or the narrow sense, which is my sense, my understanding of mysticism, It is a continuing attempt, not a pursuit of the presence of God. That's a mystic. And not all Christians are called to be mystics. They are busy with many other things, and they can be even holier than certain mystics in their life, which is not mystical, but must be, like all the baptized, must be prayerful. So prayerfulness is demanded of all Christians, but not mysticism. Mysticism is a charism, and it is for the sake of the church to stimulate people to become more prayerful. So you see, for instance, in the letters of Therese of Lisieux, she has many letters to Carmelite nuns, to all kinds of people who were involved in the family, the society, the French anti-clerical society, mind you, in her age. It's very interesting to see that. She's a good catechist, and she explained, in her own words, what is their call. So each one has to discern one's charism, and you have the 3 lists of charisms in St. Paul, in the letters.
Mm-hmm. He kind of follows that up with the fact that he's asking, do you think that, well, he's saying the church seems to be reluctant to address this genuine hunger for experience rather than doctrine, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This I'm very sensitive to that because earlier in my life I was an agnostic when I was a teenager with that little group of artists, and we were rebelling against the Catholic Church of the 1950s. It gives you a sense of. Okay, so I'm very sensitive to that, and I read a lot about that. The famous nuns, N-O-N-E-S, they click, well, they are now almost 25% of the American population, according to the famous Pew surveys. It's incredible. Yeah. But there is, among them, some are seekers. And that's also, and even those who are not very seekers, they are more superficial. There is a nostalgia about something deeper. And also what is interesting is that not only those who have very negative experiences in their life, sickness, bereavement, loss of a spouse, a child also who is very sick or handicapped, etc. But even those who have positive experience, plenty of success, and they become wealthy or great artists, they still have this nostalgia, and it's not automatic, become seekers. So my question is really, and I'm sure also your question, John, and the previous person's question is really, how is the church going to what is the church going to offer? Because the church, most priests and pastors were not trained to be accompaniers, those who accompany people who come, and to all the skills that are needed. You need a minimum of psychology. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people come and we discuss, and they will be very assertive. But it's kind of that disguises a wound behind that. If you don't take account of that, you will have only theoretical opposition. Well, we know that Christ is risen, and all kinds of this bad apologetic. There's no future for that. So I think that's what Rahner meant, and rightly so. We need a church that will be mystical in the broad sense, meaning prayerful and capable of exercising all the gifts of welcoming. We call that also hospitality. And there's a lot of occasions that sometimes, especially if you have drunk a little bit of good wine or a beer, etc., people become more open, at the end of an evening, in a pub or in the family. And there is really a possibility of evangelizing. But evangelizing in a modern way, influenced by modern psychology. Wow. I think Dr. Schlitt, an Oblate, a friend of mine, had a remark which I saw at the bottom, but it's no longer there. Oh, should I click chat?
I'll look for that and come back. But right now I have a question, another question that maybe that came up. Can you say more about Luther's view of sanctification? One of the that's a question on the question.
Yes. Well, he has no room for sanctification. It is Calvin. Calvin, I check in, of course, in the famous book, his long book, whose title I'm forgetting at the moment. So Calvin's, he doesn't use the word sanctification except maybe 2 or 3 times. But it's always the reality of sanctification that he promotes. So you have that, of an excellent theologian at Yale, H. Richard Niebuhr.
Yeah.
It was a fan of mine. I had a course on him in Toronto, and I became very interested in the so-called Yale School. It was one of the first. Hans Phi was the beginner, and then Niebuhr. But Niebuhr has a book on the 5 types of relating Christ and culture. The title is Christ and Culture. And one of them is really the Reformed way. And it's Calvinist, it's Calvin's way. That it is going to make a difference in the persons of the believers and in society. That's why in Geneva, they had a Reformed society. And you had the police to monitor the morals of that's the bad side of it, But anyway, so Calvin really became, as I said before, more Catholic in accepting the idea of, so grace, in other words, is really makes you better and better. There is growth in love and in faith and in hope. And that's really a transformation. And that is called sanctification. You become a saint. In a broad sense of saint or a holy person. And that's what we can observe in many people. In Japan, just a quick word, I had a supper with a Buddhist, and at some point, the Buddhist, he was a practitioner of Zen, and he was a teacher like me. And he asked me about how I deal with the young ones, in the teenagers. And both had an experience. And I realized at that time that he has such a love for his students. And I said, I am in the presence of a holy person. That's it. But he probably did not become a holy person overnight.
Yeah.
And of course, Zen and also Catholicism offer means to move forward.
Great. Here's Dale actually says, Louis, you bring great seriousness and substantiality, so to speak, to our theological and spiritual thinking. I was just wondering if Basil of Caesarea on the Holy Spirit would not perhaps be even more experiential, so to speak, than his brother Gregory of Nyssa, to the point where he is, in a way, very experiential. So this is Dale Schlitt, a professor emeritus of both Oblate and St. Paul's, and proposing that to you.
You mean Gregory of Nazianzen?
Well, he's talking about Basil of Caesarea.
Oh, Basil. Oh, yeah, yes, Basil. Yeah. The 3 of them, the 3 Cappadocian fathers, were very spiritual. It's absolutely admirable. Yeah.
And so would you say that they share this notion of experience, that he's suggesting that Basil's work is extremely experiential?
As I said, when you use the payera, the experience, it's only once. So I don't think that, I think they have in common the fact that they are really trying to explain the Catholic faith. And that's really the main intention. But it's full of experiential details if you are sensitive to those details in the 3 of them.
Sure. Another attendee asks, can you share a bit more about Schleiermacher's concept of God consciousness? And how does this demonstrate an absence of supernatural in his theology?
Yeah. Okay, so just something I appreciate very much is God consciousness with a hyphen. And so I think he was a natural mystic, because he has no room for the supernatural. So what can I say? It is really, I think, the same thing that I think he doesn't say I had that experience. He's a systematic theologian. He wants to be objective, and but it seems that he had the experience that several Catholic mystics had. Namely, there is a feeling of identity in the relation with God. It's no longer a mere union, but it is also an identity. Eckhart, of course, who loved paradoxical language, wrote more than once, "I am the eternal Son of God."
Yeah.
And Al-Ajai, a Muslim mystic, Al-Ajai, was crucified for having said, "I am God." See? So psychologically, it is an experience that is valid. Even John of the Cross says that.
That's right. Yeah.
But ontologically, psychologically, ontologically, we remain a self, remain a person.
Yeah.
Ontologically, it is a union. But it's sometimes experienced as an identity. And if we are really divinized, which is the doctrine of the church fathers, and namely Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, etc., we are divinized. We are with Christ, son and daughters of God, of the Father. So if we are divinized, it should be a surprise and surely not a heresy to have an experience of God consciousness, Gottes Bewusstsein, in German. So I like this idea very much, and that's. But in my first article on Schleiermacher for the Journal of Religion, which is the place to publish on Schleiermacher in the U.S., I used mystic a couple of times, and they didn't want me to use the word mystic for Schleiermacher. No. And we didn't have at that time, a find for the words. So when I revised, because there was a good report on my article, and I revised a few things, I forgot to eliminate, and there was one left. And they said, "We want this adjective out of the window." I found that was that's so funny about strict so. But anyway, they did not understand, I think, Schleiermacher's experience.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great insight. Thank you. Here's one. Another attendee says, "No, you said that knowing comes before knowledge. Can you tease this out for me?"
Oh, it depends. I think it's interacting. So it's like the chicken and the egg. Which one comes first? I remember chicken and egg, or egg or chicken. So as I said before, there are factors that are operative in the quest for meaning. So here you have the priority of knowledge. Okay, so it depends on the journeys, the journeys of the people talking about. So we should not be dogmatic about this, but other people would be more inclined to listen to their heart. So then the heart or the affectivity comes first, but they are always working in tandem. It's impossible not to have some kind of at least knowing, in contrast to knowledge, with the experience of the heart. And vice versa, it's impossible to have a serious quest for meaning without the heart being involved, because in the quest for meaning, there is a lot of desire, and that's more typical of the heart. So it is a continuing interaction, if it's healthy. But some people have a wrong control of all that. They say it's either the heart or the mind, either or. But it's both and also how, thanks to this interaction.
That's interesting. And this is another question, but it kind of follows up on that. This from a Carolyn, one of the attendees. In Lonergan's thought, the four precepts to be attentive, intelligent, reasonable, and responsible. Would you say that this process, this is the process to authentic objectivity?
Oh, yes, exactly. That's why I said I don't have the time to explain intentionality, but I said what it meant, what the word meant, but I could not. But he said you have the four levels, yeah, and that's operative everywhere, even in science, because you have in science, and you heard of Polanyi, the famous ex-Hungarian who wrote a book about what is implicit in a scientist's mind when the scientist is asking a question. There are a lot of tacit or implicit presuppositions, and that also many of them come from the heart.
And even in science, right? That's a point.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Joyce asks, do you feel that charismatic form of striving for union with God is not compatible with a mystic form of quiet striving?
Again?
So the question is, do you feel that a charismatic form, the charismatic form of striving for God, it's with a capital C, so I presume we're talking about the charismatic movement, striving for union with God is not compatible with the mystic form of a quiet striving?
Yes and no. I knew a person who in Boston who were a Catholic woman who were charismatic. And she and others felt that they needed something else, something more. And they discovered centering prayer. You see? So I think that the charismatics are beginners in the among the ways, the first way, the three ways of the beginners, and then you have the proficients, and then you have those who are illumination, the three stages, going back to Alexandria. The famous origin of Alexander. Anyway, so you see, I think that that it's normal to we should not disdain the experience of the charismatics or Pentecostals, but it's kind of youthful. It's youthful. I know a Dominican who knew a lot of psychology, a good philosopher still living, who had that opinion. I got it from him. That and he also had a positive explanation of even falling down backward, that kind of thing. So, or also glossolalia, it's of course part. You see, Paul would be a good guide for that. Paul, he said, I'm going to show you a better way, better than all the charisms. Even apostle and administrators, and even myself, I am in the third group, the teachers. So beyond that, it's love, and love, when it matures, tend to be quiet. I remember a Cistercian in Quebec who had a wonderful, very simple book, Père Jacques. And Père Jacques says it's like the mystical life or the contemplative life is like two old people who have been together for 50 years. And in a wonderful, he would have said Texan evening, because it's cool, but it's not, and it's not too cold, it's not too warm. And then they are on the balcony and they don't talk. They just are happy together. And they have all those memories.
Yeah.
And especially the tough memories and the good memories of their children and grandchildren and all that. And they are at peace and they don't talk. So that would be indicative of mysticism.
I was actually just going to name that theologian, Pentecostal theologian you were talking about, Amos Yong.
I don't know him.
Well, you were talking about the Pentecostal theologian who talks about
Oh, yes.
recovery of the kind of need to bring together the Christian, the larger tradition with Pentecostalism.
Yeah, his name is Cecil Robeck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's really more or less he's the main theologian of the Pentecostals in the U.S. at the moment. Yeah.
Bowler. Okay. Good.
This lecture will be published in a forthcoming edition of the Lonergan workshop. If you are interested, and you could always email me but they are moving very slowly. I gave it at Boston College, and you have the best edition here. So I have revised my text this morning and made changes because I have dropped things for this lecture. So it's the 5th time I give this lecture. I think it's the best. I hope it's the best.
There's a lot of other questions. I want to just try one. I want to try and get 2 in, so I'll do one. From Rick, do you feel that Celtic Christianity might be a tradition that could be included, that included a strong religious experience group through their attention to nature?
Oh yes, yes, and that's something that was lost with modernity for Christians, I mean. Disconnected. It has much to do with Descartes, the 2 substances. So the important thing is your soul, which is intellectual, and of course the openness to the divine in the soul. But he makes abstraction of all the rest, all the animal life that we are, and vegetable. So we have in the Middle Ages, you have three souls: vegetative and animal, and also rational soul. That's in Aristotle. So you have cultures that became, the modern culture in particular, disconnected. And you have also a great desire among our contemporaries to be one with nature, and hence ecology. Demonstrations and caring for the planet Earth. What have we done with the planet Earth? And so forth. So I'm all in favor. The danger is to become pantheistic, to deify nature, and to be happy with a mere union with nature, and everything becomes impersonal. You don't have the personal relationship with God that you have in theism. And that's also the danger of even Buddhism. But in their famous shunyata, which is kind of a hole, you immerse in that hole and you disappear, so to speak. So most people, of course, who are interested in nature will not think I'm going to disappear, but I'm still an ego in the good sense of ego. But nevertheless, there is this kind of block. And that's something that's surely a challenge for evangelization. Surely a big challenge, this kind of pantheism in nature. So I'm a kind of 2 minds about nature.
That's good. I think we can get one more in here from Angela. She asks, how do we discern whether or not we're a mystic? It would seem that you lack humility if you claim you're a mystic, but nevertheless, we're supposed to try, if we have this charism, to develop it.
Yes. Yeah.
How is it that one validates or confirms or understands, interprets this charism in their daily lives?
Okay, so we have 2 great mystics who provides criteria to discern whether you're called to this kind of contemplation, which is beyond words. In fact, I personally think that it's not totally beyond thinking, but it's you have one word. In centering prayer, you have your sacred word, or words, because you can change anytime following the Holy Spirit. And one day you would be focused more on the Holy Spirit. Another day, the Good Father. Another day, Christ crucified, and you will have the experience in the coming week of Christ crucified. So, so you have criteria in the Cloud of Unknowing and in John of the Cross.
You're right.
That's, and they both of them believe that not all were called. So with an accompanier, you could discern that this is not crazy, that you can really accept that you are no longer happy or contented with pious thoughts and feelings. And then there's something else. And that there's something else is mysticism. And that's why I propose, and my students are listening at the moment. I have a course at the moment at Oblate on Christian mysticism. I prefer the narrow understanding of mysticism, the narrow definition. But I don't reject the broad definition, because the broad definition would be like everybody is called to become very prayerful. And if you don't accept that, you're no longer a good Christian. But if you say, I'm not called to become a mystic, for instance, historians tell us Vincent de Paul probably was not a mystic. But in John of the Cross, it's obvious. In Ignatius of Loyola, his secretary said that when he was in Rome, no longer traveling, he said, well, he was sending his sons throughout the world, like Francis Xavier. Just in Japan, he said, "Well, wow, what a travel!" So, but he was always in the presence of God, and you could say that with other Jean-Jacques Collier, the founder of the Sulpicians, and we have also Sulpicians on campus here. My boss at Gaiden is Father Myers. Well, he said that. So some don't say that, but others near them say that. And also you could, so you have a way of distinguishing whether yourself is called or which one is really a mystic. And then the people of God finally, and that, like in the East, they canonize people, but they are also an official ceremony. But the process of canonization is more subtle than in the East, in the West, with all those miracles, etc. And Pope Francis is kind of getting rid of the miracles. Okay, one miracle by Pope John Paul will, good Pope John will suffice. Let's canonize him, that kind of thing. On that joyful noise, I will leave you. I conclude, John.
Well, we're so grateful. We're so grateful. This was a really enlightening and fascinating lecture. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being with us. I'm sure there's lots of applause out there in the privacy of lots of homes and offices, etc. But thank you very much, Louis. This was.
I think Joel will add something. Joel
will finish.
Yes.
Off there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Father Louis. As Father John said, just a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. You've offered so many insights and things to reflect upon, and just with a great twinkle in your eye and with such warmth and humor about it, but so wise and informative. So thank you for everything you've shared this evening. I also want to thank all those who've tuned in tonight on our audience on Zoom here. Just your questions and your comments have so enriched the evening, and the discussion here have broadened the topic. So thank you so much for all your participation and your presence. It's been a wonderful blessing to both our Oblate School and to our continuing ed program here this night. So thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
We hope that you'll return again for future events at OST here, whether it's online or praise God soon in person down the line. So, and just want to wish everyone a continued blessings and grace in this Lenten season on this Annunciation Day, and just a wonderful celebration of Holy Week this coming week. So thank you all. God bless you. Have a good night.